Welcome back to the second installment of Haunted Savannah on Stormy Tells Ghost Stories on my Girls Rock Productions channel. This week I will continue on with the Haunted Mansions of Savannah. This installment I will talk about the 12 West Oglethorpe, the Hampton Lillibridge House, the Willink House, and the Owens-Thomas House. I'm going to start with a mansion that, much like 432 Abercorn Street, has been surrounded by a hazy past and rumors. 12 West Oglethorpe. So, 12 West Oglethorpe has sat abandoned for almost 40 years. Located just around the corner from the historic Wright Square, it was the childhood home of Daisy Lowe, who I talked about in last week's segment when talking about the Andrew Lowe House. It became the meeting spot for a Masonic fraternity and then was a performing arts school. The building was abandoned in 1985 and rumors of hauntings have been swirling around ever since. It's unknown when the building at 12 West Oglethorpe was constructed. Before the area's development, the building was a burial ground, like pretty much the rest of Savannah. The area was specifically a Jewish burial site. The house itself was dated back to 1898, but there has been a building in that spot for long before that. The Gordon family supposedly owned the house in the 1860s after moving from 10 West Oglethorpe to distance themselves from an ever-present family feud. Juliet Gordon Lowe, also known as Daisy Lowe, was born at 10 West Oglethorpe and lived in 12 West Oglethorpe for at least a decade, but it's unclear when the Gordon family actually moved out of the home. After its renovations, the home was sold to the Benevolent Protection and Order of the Elks, a Masonic fraternity and social club. The Elks Lodge used the building as their meeting place for over 50 years, which makes them the building's longest tenant. And the initials of the order, BPOE, are still engraved on the house today. The building has been subject to many legends and rumors, but some of the history has been confirmed. During the last major outbreak of yellow fever in Savannah, Georgia, a doctor was said to be living in 12 West Oglethorpe. As the population of Savannah dwindled in size, it was a matter of time before the doctor himself fell victim to the unforgiving disease, and the danger of becoming infected with this disease always seemed to be greater upon one's arrival home. The doctor's time came late one evening when he decided to call it a day after vigilantly working to save lives during the Yellow Plague, which had turned the city into a dystopia worse than hell. While the doctor risked infection every day at work, it was upon his fateful return home that night that he would finally face his own mortality. As he walked up to the front door of his house, a sick feeling washed over him. He figured he was being paranoid and reminded himself that his home was his sanctuary. But he would soon realize how wrong he was when he entered the house. The disease had made its way into his home. His youngest child's fever had spiked and his organs seemed to be shutting down. Over the next couple of days, the doctor stayed home trying to save his child, but he could do nothing. Over the time, his child's skin yellowed, while the sickness he was regurgitating was black as tar. It was not long after that the child would fall into a coma and pass later in the night. The doctor could not believe that for all the years of training and practicing medicine, he still couldn't save his own child. Unfortunately, his youngest child's death was only the beginning of his suffering. One by one, the fever took hold of each family member, ravaging them all with the same horrifying symptoms. And one by one, the doctor would fight vigorously, trying to save at least one of them, but alas, he could not. He began to blame himself for their deaths. He chose to stay in Savannah when the outbreak started, and he believed God was punishing him for his selfishness. He would pray to catch the disease himself, and to suffer the same fate as his beloved family, but his fever would never spike. Finally, driven mad by his sorrow, he decided to board himself up in the room where it all began, the room that his youngest child died in. He refused to eat, drink, or even lie on the bed, and he would eventually pass away from starvation within days. Many people question the validity of the story. Some of the facts just don't seem to add up. Firstly, yellow fever spreads through the transmission of mosquitoes, not person to person. However, it was the summertime in Georgia and the family could have been bitten by mosquitoes. Others argue that no doctor ever lived in the home, and the ghost stories surrounding the doctor were created because 12 West Oglethorpe was your quintessential haunted house. Regardless, reports of the ghostly activity in the house still seem to revolve around the doctor. Now, the house at 12 West Oglethorpe has been sat vacant for so long, it has become the stuff of urban legend. The building has been in need of some TLC for a while, and part of the upper floor is even missing. In regards to the famed doctor, tourists report seeing an apparition of a man standing in the windows of the house. Many claim to have captured photos of the doctor's ghost. Tourists on guided tours also say they've gotten sick when merely walking up to the house. Those affected say they feel the symptoms of yellow fever when they get too close to the building, and the symptoms will subside as they retreat and walk away. Many visitors to the house believe that his spirit remains to continue to grieve the loss of his family. In 2009, a few pranksters started a fire behind the building. After the firefighters put out the blaze, a few of them claimed to have seen the ghost in the room where the doctor allegedly died. After the fire in 2009, firefighters conducted a walkthrough of the house to check for structural damage. One of the firefighters entered the room where the doctor had locked himself up. The firefighter let out a loud yell, then ran out of the house and locked himself into the fire engine. He never revealed what he saw to his colleagues, but many believe he encountered the ghost of the doctor. Many people believe that the actual cause of the hauntings is the building's proximity to Wright Square, the location of Savannah's first recorded murder, or that it is due to being built on top of a Jewish burial ground. The bodies of the dead were never moved, so the remains of thousands of people remain under the paved street. Now we are going to go ahead and visit the house where the city's only religious exorcism was conducted, and it failed. The Hampton Lillibridge House. Located in the historic district and only a short walk from Oglethorpe Square on East St. Julian Street lies the Hampton Lillibridge House. It's distinctive and elegant. It boasts two beautiful stories and a wide ship-like siding. It was constructed for Hampton Lillibridge, who was originally from Rhode Island. The design matched that of a New England coastal town, despite being built in the heart of the South. Hampton's widow would sell the home after his death, and its new owner converted it into a fancy boarding house. In its new role, it witnessed at least one tragedy. A sailor, weary and troubled, stopped at the house for a short break. He ended up becoming overwhelmed by his sadness and committed suicide by hanging himself in one of the boarding house's guest suites. The suicide destroyed the reputation of the house, which eventually closed for business. The home has become a sort of legendary property in the area, having been owned by Jim Williams in 1963. Yes, the same Jim Williams from the Mercer Williams house and the inspiration for the main character in John Berendt's book Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. The events that occurred in the book mirrored Jim's own life. Jim was an esteemed antique dealer and an architectural restorationist, and he took great pleasure in restoring the Lillibridge house to its former glory. A common story of the home tells of the process of moving the house. Picture it. An entire home on blocks and wheels, a precarious sight, dangerous for the laborers given the job. On its way down the road, part of the roof collapsed, crushing one of the workers who later died from his injuries. The issues with the home didn't end with its moving, and perhaps the moving of the home just jostled up some of the energies that had been stored deep within. It is widely believed by the ghost hunting community that moving or renovating a home can wrestle up the entities that reside there, sometimes even to the point of physical attacks taking place. John Williams' construction crew's misfortune did not stop with the death of one of their workers. They would all report chills, tingling sensations on the back of their necks when they were in or around the home. At times, they even thought furniture was being moved around due to how loud the entities were becoming. The sounds and disembodied voices could be heard from different rooms. Ghostly laughter would fill the old home. Tools and construction equipment began to go missing, and building materials were being destroyed. Many members of the crew decided to quit halfway through the job, but can you blame them? Reports of the ghostly happenings soon spread to the local media, and eventually a news crew came out to the home to see for themselves what all the fuss was about. As they entered the home, a piece of construction material came flying at them. Needless to say, they left for the evening. A handful of the restoration workers stayed to brave the haunting, and one of the workers was rewarded for his commitment to the team after his very personal confrontation with an aggressive entity. The worker heard an extremely loud noise upstairs, and since no one was supposed to be up on the second floor, he went up right away to investigate the sound of the disturbance. When he didn't return to his co-workers for quite a long time, they began to worry about him. They went upstairs to find him and saw a horrific sight. He was whimpering on the floor, face down, scraping the wood with his nails, terrified. After they were able to calm him, they asked what had happened. He explained that he had walked into the room and was almost instantaneously overcome by the feeling of being thrown into ice-cold water. He said he felt like he was losing complete control over his body and felt as though something had taken possession of him. He then said the mysterious force was attempting to drag him to an open chimney shaft where a 3-story drop would have certainly killed him. As he retold his harrowing tale, the man uttered that the house needed an exorcism. As the word left his lips, a woman's scream echoed throughout the room, a scream from an unseen entity. As well as screams and terrifying physical encounters, the builders working on the restoration reported seeing apparitions. One was often described as a tall man dressed in black. The workers stated that the entity would watch them all day from the 3rd floor window. He wore a black suit and a light-colored tie. Others that visited the home during its restorations reported seeing a man with gray hair wearing a robe. People who lived nearby complained of the loud parties and noise coming from an empty house. Some even reported seeing people dancing through the 3rd-story windows. No electrical issues were discovered in the home, but lights constantly flickered. A woman who lived nearby even came to Williams herself and mentioned that she had recently started feeling a male presence at the home. Not a human, but an evil presence. Williams rejected the idea, but revealed to her in detail that could be the key to the entire mystery of the house. During the moving and restoration of the home, the crew had dug up the house's foundation and found an ancient crypt dated from pre-colonial period. Williams was notified, and it's not clear what exactly happened to the crypt or the remains, but there was no mention of moving any of the bodies. It seems as if the crypt was just buried underneath the home. Even after all these incidents, Williams moved right into his beautifully renovated historic home. The spirits welcomed him right away in a form of slamming doors, footsteps, apparitions, and chasing him down hallways. Great roommates. Finally, Williams had enough. The spirits were disrupting his daily life, and he had to do something about it. He went to an Episcopal bishop from the nearby church, Reverend Albert Rhett Stewart. On December 7, 1963, the bishop conducted an exorcism of the home. He even blessed the property. He demanded that the spirits leave and rest in peace. His efforts cleared the home of all activity for less than a week. A few days later, all activity resumed. Investigators from all over the world flocked to the house in hopes of capturing evidence of the hauntings there. Other homeowners have bought the house since Williams sold it, and it remains a private residence. The house was listed for sale again in 2018, mentioning a storied past in the ad. The asking price for this haunted haven was almost $2.5 million. The home is only a short walk from Oglethorpe Square and 12 West Oglethorpe. The next house on our list has seen more sadness and despair than any other haunted house in Savannah, and that's saying something. The Willink House. The Willink House isn't your quintessential haunted mansion, but the dainty white cottage hides a very dark history. The unassuming home seems to be out of place in Savannah's historic streets, looking like it would be more at home in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. It was once the property of influential shipbuilder Henry Willink, who was charged with building some of the Confederacy's biggest and most powerful vessels, and it has been moved from its original location to a brand new one on the northwest corner of Price and St. Julian Streets. Today it is home to quite a few spirits, so despite its looks, it fits right in on the streets of Savannah. Henry Willink was born to a German immigrant in 1825 and came from decidedly new money. Like many newcomers to America, his father had big dreams involving lucrative cash and, you guessed it, unimaginable success. By 1860, at the age of 75, Henry Willink Sr. had amassed nearly as much as $59,000 and 23 slaves to the shipyard that he owned. He had done so well for himself and expected the same from his son, who was following in his father's footsteps. Henry left for New York to learn the trade and ended up returning to Savannah in 1851, ready and able to open a shipyard of his very own. Willink had his home built upon his arrival to the city, or perhaps sooner, as records show it was there in 1845. Henry and his business associate, Arthur Miller, named their company Willink & Miller and immediately got to work building large ships. They became so successful so quickly that the Confederacy contracted them to build their ironclad vessels during the American Civil War. The Confederates relied heavily on European shipyards and were in the market to find a domestic shipyard that could build ships that would hold their own against the Union. Willink & Miller were so sure that they had the means to deliver. Unfortunately, they did not. Their first gift to the Confederate Army was the CSS Georgia, also known as the Ladies' Gunboat. She cost a whopping $115,000 to construct, totaling just over $1.8 million in today's standards. The Confederacy expected a first-class ship. What they got was a clunky disaster. The iron armor on the CSS Georgia was so dense that it wasn't practical. During her voyages to the Savannah River, the public questioned the ship as well as Willink & Miller. The company even had to launch a PR campaign to try and quell the concerns of the Savannah residents. The company claimed that the ship was meant to function as a floating battery and not a warship, but no one was buying that excuse. Willink and Miller started working on the second ship of the Confederacy even after their first failure. This time they worked to learn from their mistakes of the CSS Georgia, but again they failed. The CSS Savannah didn't fare much better than her predecessor. It was bulky, difficult to maneuver, the interior was hot and humid, and worst of all, the ship leaked. The CSS Savannah did provide some use to the Confederate Army, but they sank the ship themselves in 1864. This was presumably done to save face in case Union forces captured the ship and saw that the Confederates had useless ships. But the CSS Georgia and the CSS Savannah were destroyed near Fort Jackson to prevent such embarrassment. The love that Henry had for his wife was the driving force behind his can-do attitude. Unfortunately for Mrs. Willink, Henry's passions for his work would eventually be her undoing. Henry loved his career and he desperately wanted to share his projects with his wife. He eagerly invited her to take a trip to the shipyard with him, which she agreed to. After arriving at the shipyard, things were business as usual. Everything was great, and Henry himself gave his wife a tour around the premises. As she climbed up a flight of stairs, Mrs. Willink tripped and fell over the railing of the yard and plunged into the Savannah River. Henry was horrified. He rushed to save her, but he was unable to make it to her before her heavy dress and skirt weighed her down, essentially sinking her. She drowned as she fought against the current, but succumbed to the river, leaving Henry devastated and alone. In the years that followed, Henry worked even harder to try and keep his mind off of his wife's death. He often saw her apparition in the home in the middle of the night. This would cause it to be that his only escape was to go to his shipyard, slamming the doors of his house behind him. One night he saw his wife's ghost again, this time while at his yard. She was hovering by the rail where she fell. Henry reached out for her and ended up falling into the river too. Nearly suffering the same fate as his late wife, he was fortunately able to swim to safety. After Willink moved from his home, it's said that the property became a secret school for African American children during the years leading up to the Emancipation Proclamation. During that period, such schools were deemed illegal. The South was becoming increasingly worried that enslaved people who were literate posed more of a threat to the institution of slavery than those who could barely scrawl their own name. But that fear transcended into a much bigger issue. Slaves who congregated, or even those who were free blacks, were dangerous. If they gathered together, ideas could be tossed around and revolts slid into action. City officials criminalized the gathering of African Americans, free or enslaved, whether it be at church, a school, or simply in a park. For the Willink House to have functioned as a school for African American children would have been a crime. As the story goes amongst the local in Savannah, a white female teacher had taken up the school in secrecy so that she could teach reading and mathematical skills to enslaved children. Has it that she would coerce them into learning by bribing them with sweets, which the children agreeably snacked on, but only if they solved the problems correctly. Her school would become unveiled, and the city officials gave her a choice. She could either accept the heavy fine and arrest for breaking the law, or she could leave Savannah forever. With her heart broken, the teacher visited the school one last time to say goodbye to all of her students. It's believed that she never returned to Savannah again, at least in this life. Owners of 426 St. Julian Street have caught the scent of candy in the house as well. Perhaps the spirit of the teacher, or of even the school's children, still haunt the building. The story of the secret school for enslaved children has been questioned to its validity. Some saying that it actually was instead the DeVoe house that was the location just around the corner. This is due to some of the stories saying that the teacher was a freed black woman named Catherine DeVoe, who died before the Willink House was even built. However, owners have sworn up and down to find sweets appearing in what they claim to be rows of mathematical problems. Others have claimed to find candy moved from the kitchen to other rooms, leading them to wonder if the school children are enjoying their snacks or trying to gain attention for their spectral presence. Henry Willink himself is said to haunt the home as well, the sound of his footsteps echoing through the rooms and halls of the cottage. Neighbors state that they can still hear the sound of the front door slamming shut and his hurried phantom footsteps as he runs off to the shipyard. The spirit of Mrs. Willink is also said to reside in the home. Her apparition is seen in the windows of the house and walking around in the general area. Although the cottage is privately owned today, the spirit is reported by passerby and historians. We have saved the best haunted mansion for last, the Owens-Thomas House. What do the Savannah Theater, the Telfair Mansion, and the Owens-Thomas House have in common, aside from being considered haunted locations in Savannah, Georgia? They were all built by British architect William J. It seems that Mr. J's artistic ability to build these wonderful structures possess a transcending quality that continues to capture the eyes of the dead as well as the living. Mr. J built the Owens-Thomas House in the year 1819 and is considered to be one of the most intriguing houses in Savannah today. Currently, the historic house is operated by the Telfair Museums and has been designated a National Historic Landmark since 1976, the bicentennial. The house has maintained its English Regency style with furnishings and art from the period, with some of the pieces originating from the Owens family. The Owens-Thomas House is considered to be the pinnacle of Old Savannah, and with its long storied past, it's easy to see why the ghosts of its former guests and residents continue to roam this property. Located at 124 Abercorn Street on the Oglethorpe Square, the Owens-Thomas House has a story that goes all the way back to the year 1816, when its grounds were broken. William J., who was just 24 at the time, actually began drawing the plans for the house while still in England. sending the information regarding his work to the foreman and bringing England's Regency-era style to Georgia. Jay would arrive in Savannah not long after the foundation had been laid. In 1819, the house was completed. The house was originally owned by shipping merchant and slave trader Richard Richardson and his wife Frances. The Richardsons moved into the home with their 6 children and 9 enslaved men, women, and children in January of 1819. The Richardsons saw steady decreases in their prosperity over the following 3 years. Tragedies such as the financial panic of 1819, the yellow fever epidemic, a fire that destroyed half of the city, and the untimely death of Frances and 2 of their young children plagued the family. By 1822, Richardson decided to sell the family home and move to Louisiana, where he had family and business interests. He had been shipping enslaved people, mostly children, from Savannah to New Orleans for years. By 1824, the Bank of the United States owned the home and started leasing it to Mary Maxwell as a boarding house. One of the most famous guests of the house was the Marquis de Lafayette, a Revolutionary hero. One evening, Marquis de Lafayette stood from the house's south cast-iron balcony, overlooking an adoring crowd. He then lifted their spirits even higher with an inspiring speech addressed to all the people of Savannah. The mansion was purchased in 1830 by a local attorney and politician, George Welshman Owens, for $10,000. The Savannah-born Owens went to the University of Cambridge, the one in England, so this could be why he was drawn to the Regency-style home. After studying law in London, he returned home to Savannah, where he started his own practice. 5 years after buying the house, Owens, who had been the mayor of Savannah, was elected to the United States Congress in the year 1835. In 1839, Owens' political career came to an end, and thus he resumed his practicing law in Savannah until his death on March 2, 1956. The house eventually went to his granddaughter, Margaret Thomas. Upon her death, she bequeathed the house to the Telfair Academy of Arts and Sciences in 1951. Margaret never married and had no children with whom she could leave the house. She would constantly worry that after her death, the vultures would swoop in and pick her beloved home apart. So, she left it to the Telfair Academy with the intention of it becoming a museum. The only condition Miss Margaret had was that the museum be named after both her grandfather and father respectively. The National Historic Landmark, designated in 1976, and the Owens-Thomas House now runs as a museum with furnishings and antiques from 1750 to 1830 on full display. The Owens-Thomas House also has one of the oldest urban slave quarters still intact, which offers visitors a chance to understand that while this house is majestic, it has seen its fair share of horrors, none of which are as shameful as the act of enslaving one's fellow man. The slave quarters have virtually remained untouched in its 200 years of existence. When you enter the quarters, you find artifacts and other relics that were used by the slaves. And when you look up at the ceiling, you'll see that it's painted a watercolor blue known as Haint Blue. It is painted the color of water due to the long-standing belief that ghosts cannot travel across water. So the slaves believed that painting the ceiling blue would ward off any evil spirits and keep other restless ghosts from entering their world. These spirits were often referred to as haints. In the Owens-Thomas House's long history, it has seen just about all of it. Slavery, the fire of 1820, the Civil War, and yellow fever are just some of the tragedies that have been witnessed. It's conceivable that these events are what makes Savannah one of the most haunted cities in American South. The Owens-Thomas House might just be one of the most restless houses in the whole city. It has been long said that the Owens-Thomas House is a place of many secrets and hauntings. Spirits linger about, unable to cross over for whatever their reason might be. These lost souls roam throughout the halls and rooms of the property they call home. One of the most frequently spotted spirits is a well-built man with jet black hair, dressed in 1830s garb. This man apparently likes to stand in front of the parlor room, watching the guests as they venture around the house. When tired, he simply vanishes, walking through a wall, which is believed to be the entrance of one of the old guest rooms. And, of course, you can't truly have a haunted house without reports of items being moved and even tossed around from room to room. In particular, the dining room. Chairs in the room are occasionally moved out from its table by unseen presence. The staff has also heard phantom footsteps and unexplained noises emanating from empty rooms. Yes, there seems to be a surprise that awaits every visitor in each of the rooms in the Owens-Thomas house. This is especially so in the upper floors, where shadowy figures have been known to appear. A former maid at the Owens-Thomas house had reportedly had a few run-ins with a ghost. One night, the maid went through the dining room to make sure everything was in order as it should be. She then locked up and left for the night. Upon her return the following morning, she entered into the dining room. She was surprised to find one of the tables in disarray, with one of the chairs pulled out. She claimed it was like someone had just eaten a meal and didn't bother to pick up after themselves. Perhaps even more infamous than the ghost of the man from the 1830s is the Lady in Grey. This particular Lady in Grey is believed to be the spirit of Margaret Thomas. Miss Margaret's ghost has been spotted each night strolling around the garden in which she spent so much of her living years. She has been described as wearing a large hat and gray shawl. Rumor also has it that the very bed in which Margaret died is still located in the house. Perhaps her spirit is tied to the bed, allowing her the ability to wander around her home in the afterlife. Before the house became a museum, Miss Margaret rented the upstairs out. On one occasion, a ghost made his presence known to a couple of gentlemen who were visiting their friend who lived upstairs. The actual tenant did not see the ghost himself, but his two friends insisted that they did. They claimed to see a ghostly man wearing a riding coat and shirt with ruffles. The presence stood in the doorway for a short time before walking through the wall into a room. The tenant's friends were visibly shaken and were initially at a loss for words after their paranormal encounter. They later asked their friend if he ever had experience with any paranormal activity at the house. Their friend replied that he was scared to go downstairs at night, but had yet to encounter the man in the riding coat or spectral beings. Another account of the ghost in the riding coat comes from, again, Jim Williams, who we discussed in last week's video. Williams claimed to have had an encounter at the Owens-Thomas house in the 1960s. Williams and his business partner and a friend who rented the room upstairs were having a drink in the front room of the house. Williams and his business partner were sitting in chairs across from their friend, who was sitting on a couch. The trio had been deep in conversation for a while when Mr. Williams' business partner made note of a man who was mysteriously appeared in the back of the room, behind the friend who was seated on the couch, and walked towards Williams. The ghost neared Williams so closely that he was able to tell the color of the ghost's eyes, which were blue, and see the beads of sweat gathering on the ghost's brow. The business partner was stunned by this, and he watched Williams in a state of confusion. The ghost then vanished before their eyes. Williams later poked fun at the encounter, saying that only in Savannah would a ghost sweat. Just a week after that night, Williams' friend had another experience with the ghost and thus promptly decided to move out of the Owens-Thomas house. The next ghostly encounter reported at the Owens-Thomas house was witnessed by one of the museum's tour guides, Missy Brandt. It was late one evening, and she was giving a tour when she heard the very clear sound of someone striking a match. Soon she could smell the distinct aroma of tobacco burning. Missy then looked around the group, but no one was smoking. She then asked the group, "Does anyone smell smoke?" One of the guests responded, "Yes, I saw a match flare up behind you and smoke puffing out of thin air." This was confirmed by a few of the others in the group. They had all heard the strike of the match, followed by a phantom flame. They then exclaimed how they could see some smoke disappear just as soon as Missy had asked her before-mentioned question. Obviously, there are no shortage of creepy stories at the Owens-Thomas House, and any members of the staff will surely share with you a few spine-tingling tales. Maybe some that they have personally experienced, and others might just be retellings of encounters that a visitor may have had. One of these legends told by the staff is that late on certain nights, someone can take a picture of the house while on a tour. Then, as the trip wraps up, they may revisit their pictures and discover orbs in the background. You never know when you might capture one of the Owens-Thomas ghosts' presence. For that, we are on their time, not the other way around. The ghosts could care less about which tour is happening. They appear when they feel like it. One of these visitors had a rather strange experience during a Thanksgiving trip. In one photo she had taken, she claimed she could see an oversized face in the window. In her second picture, it appeared that there were a couple of orbs around the historic Owens-Thomas house. In the third photo, it seemed to show quarters suspiciously falling from the sky. And in her last photo taken, it supposedly shows a ghostly blonde girl with the reflection of the flash in her eyes. She was wearing a tattered blue dress and standing next to an unaware visitor who was also on the tour. The house was said to have been home for all sorts of occupants in its past, so it's unclear who this little girl in the blue dress might have been. This concludes Haunted Savannah Haunted Mansions Part 2. I hope you enjoyed all the creepy stories you heard about 12 West Oglethorpe, the Hampton Lillibridge House, the Willink House, and the Owens-Thomas House. Remember to like and subscribe my channel for more. And don't forget to check out my other playlists on this channel. My Stormy Teaches Music live streams are on a hiatus for right now because I need to get more strings for my guitar, but when they're back up, I will be live streaming Mondays and Wednesdays at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. If you are ever in the Wilmington, North Carolina area, sign up to go on the U.S. Ghost Adventures walking tour or haunted pub crawl, and you'll get to find some stories of the dark secrets behind Wilmington with me or one of our other great tour guides. And lastly, if while visiting Wilmington you decide you want to move to the area or buy a vacation home, check out my Moving to Coastal Carolina channel, as I am also a licensed realtor here in southeastern North Carolina. Don't forget to tune in next Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern for next week's installment of Haunted Savannah. Until then, stay safe and have a great week.